Good, great. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. Is that seat taken? Yeah. Ma'am, I didn't say you had big feet. Good gracious. Oh, man. I'll tell you. Oh, hi there. I'm Luther G. Williams, and this is Myth Vision at the Movies. And our very special guest today is Robert W. Sullivan IV. I tell you, the main event is going to start in just about 2 minutes. I've got my refreshments. My cell phone's on vibrate. But what's a great movie without an exciting trailer, right? Here's my co-host, Derek Lambert.
Hey guys, Derek Lambert here. Coming soon to Myth Vision, the spine-tingling, spellbounding, mind-blowing New York Times best-selling author Tim Freak talks about New Age mythicism and the Great Awakening going on around the world. Well, we don't want you to miss this very special Myth Vision at the Movies coming soon, January the 26th. There's lots more planned for you, including a newsletter with information on upcoming shows and guests, updates on past guests, profiles of explorers, researchers, scientists, scholars, mystics, historians, and of course, your input in engaging our guests. So come check us out on Facebook at Myth Vision Podcast. That's a page. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a show, and make sure you hit that bell. We're asking for your participation, your contribution, your support in helping Myth Vision Podcast to continue bringing you the finest programming. Our PayPal accounts and Patreon accounts, they'll be in your description below. They might even pop up on the screen. So please contribute, donate whatever you can. No amount is too small. Won't you partner with us at Myth Vision? Look, Luther, I'm excited about today's show. Would you please tell us about our special guest?
Wow, Derek, that was a great trailer. Well, it's time for our feature presentation. Robert W. Sullivan IV is a Freemason, philosopher, historian, antiquarian, jurist, lay theologian, writer, mystic, radio TV personality, best-selling author, CEO, and lawyer. He attended Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania, becoming a brother of Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity, earning his Bachelor of Arts in History in 1995. Mr. Sullivan spent his entire junior year of college abroad at St. Catherine's College of Oxford University in England, studying European history and philosophy. Upon returning to the United States in June of 1993, he took a year off from Gettysburg College to serve as office director of Washington International Studies Council, located on Capitol Hill. That's right, folks, we have a Washington insider with us today. He attended Widener University School of Law, Delaware campus, where he received his Juris Doctorate. And Mr. Sullivan has been admitted to the State Bar of Maryland, as well as that of the District of Columbia. He is, of course, a Freemason, having joined the Amicable St. John's Lodge number 25 of Baltimore, Maryland. For 20 years, he's been a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. His book, The Royal Arch of Enoch, The Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy, and Symbolism, was released in 2012 and republished in 2016. It's the product of 20 years of research. In 2014, Mr. Sullivan published a second book, Cinema Symbolism, a guide to esoteric imagery in popular movies, which was republished in 2017. We'll get a lot into that today. And his third book, which was also released that year, is called Cinema Symbolism 2, More Esoteric Imagery from Popular Movies. That same year in December, he published his first work of fiction, A Pact with the Devil. Mr. Sullivan is currently working on 5 books at once. Count them. I'm running out of fingers to count his projects, including one called Freemasonry and the Path to Babylon, Cinema Symbolism 3, and a sequel and prequel to A Pact with the Devil. Check out his website, robertwsullivan4.com. The fourth is spelled in Roman numerals, IV, and you'll find there his blog, news, updates, events, media appearances, tantalizing excerpts from his books, glowing reviews, and much more. You can order his books through that site. Robert, it's great to have you on Myth Vision Podcast.
Well, thank you, Luther. Thank you and Derek for having me on. It's my pleasure to be here. And I must say that I think that was probably one of the best introductions I've ever received. I have to be honest with you, when people read that, there is always a word that doesn't come out right or something is mispronounced. And I think you nailed everything. So my hat's off to you, brother. That was fantastic.
Oh,
Well, thank you, Robert. I didn't want to mess up on the secret things, given the nature of the show, right?
Oh,
Man.
yeah. I mean, no, it was a great way to start, and I don't know why this is. It's funny. It's funny that we start off like this because, and again, it's not a knock on any other shows I've been on or anything like that. But I cannot tell you how many times people mispronounce the first book I ever wrote, The Royal Arch of Enoch. I do not know why this is. It might be psychological when people think of the Ark of the Covenant or something, but people are constantly calling that book the Royal Ark of Enoch. And that is a mispronunciation. And that happens so often. I cannot tell you. It's happened more than once. It's happened on numerous occasions. And it was so wonderful to hear that introduction where you just nailed everything. Everything 100% correct. So my hat's off to you.
We're going to have a great time talking about that book and so much more with you. You've been really busy the last couple of years, haven't you?
Oh, yes, sir. I did the Royal Arch of Enoch book. That came out, I mean, that's hard to believe. That's almost 5.5 years old now. That book was republished by me. That was my first book. That was republished by me, let's see, those 16, so a little over 2 years ago at the end of December. The company that originally put it out, in the first cinema book, I'm no longer in business with for various reasons. I'll just leave it at that. And then as I was reorganizing and getting those books out, I was working on 2 other books, which was Cinema Symbolism 2, which was the sequel to the first movie book. That book was released exclusively by me. Deadwood Publishing is my publishing house. That came out in August. Let's see, that was April of 17, so that's been out almost 2 years. And then A Pact with the Devil, that was something I was also working simultaneously at the same time when I was writing Cinema Symbolism 2. That came out, like you correctly said, in December of 17. So yeah, I have 4 books out right now. They're in the print edition ebook. You can get them right now. And right now, I'm currently really concentrating on, you were right on the 5 books, but I'm really concentrating on 2 of them in earnest, which is Cinema Symbolism 3 and this prequel story from A Pact with the Devil. Those are the 2 really that I'm writing in earnest right now.
Wow. Well, Rob, with everything that you're doing, you know what people want to talk about now. What's with this Freemasonry? There's Derek smiling in the background there. Tell us something about the Masons in our midst now. What's the overview of the structure of Freemasonry? How is it organized administratively around us or in the country, or however you want to frame that?
Right. So the way it works is, it's a broad question. I'll try to narrow it. Essentially, the way a person would want to become it starts small, and I would say it gets larger. The way a person would, if they wanted to become a Mason, would be to join what is called the local Blue Lodge. This is the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry. This is the degrees of Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, and Master Mason. Once you have completed those 3 degrees, then you can hold yourself out as a Freemason. At that point in time, you can go into, there are numerous high degree bodies of Freemason you can go into. The 2 premier ones in the United States are what are called the York Rite and the Scottish Rite. Those are completely voluntary. You do not have to go into them. You can if you want to, but no one will twist your arm for one or the other. Administratively, the way the Blue Lodge is organized, it's run by the guy who runs it for the year. It's run annually. It changes. It's called the Worshipful Master, and he's assisted in running the lodge by 2 wardens. Then you have, that's the local Blue Lodge level. That's how you become a Freemason. The Blue Lodges, the local lodges, like you mentioned during the intro, Amicable St. John's Lodge, which is the one I'm in, these fall under the aegis of the Grand Lodge of Maryland. I'm in Baltimore, so the lodges in Maryland all fall under the State Grand Lodge of Maryland. What is particular is each state Grand Lodge governs itself. There is no unifying national Grand Lodge in the United States. Each Grand Lodge is its own separate entity. So, for example, I'd be under the State Grand Lodge of Maryland. The Grand Lodge of Maryland couldn't bark orders or dictate to the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, let's say. So that's really the way administratively the lodge system in the United States is structured, with the local Blue Lodges answerable to the state Grand Lodges, who are independent of each other's state Grand Lodges. Then you have the high degree bodies. Like I said, there's other ones, but the 2 biggies are the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, and they are recognized by the state Grand Lodges as legitimate affiliates of Masonry. There are Masonic-like organizations out there that are legal, and I don't have a problem with them, but they are not Freemasonic per se. They do not attach themselves at any state or local or high degree Grand Lodge system. They are Masonic-like, but they are not part of Freemasonry proper.
Ah, okay.
Interesting. Okay. You guys, I know I had to get conspiratorial with my little pyramid with the
Yeah.
eye. You'll see me change it throughout the show. So quick question. I mean, I think this is something any average person, even as such as myself, I am no expert in understanding any of this. So I'm taking notes. How does an individual progress within the organization, at least your organization, yourself being a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, like really kind of, how do they progress, and like, what is the purpose of it? Is it really holding secrets? I mean, you know.
Right, no, I understand the question. It's a great question, and it's one of those questions where it almost depends on who you talk to. I am in the camp that it does contain, the rituals do contain esoteric secrets. That is the camp I am in. There are other Masons out there who will tell you these are just harmless allegories that have no deeper meaning, and that people like myself are seeing things that aren't there. My research has led me to believe the otherwise. I believe these rituals and these symbols are containing these lost esoteric, what you would want to call mystery school symbols. Freemasonry incorporates so many elements into it. It's one of the reasons I was attracted to it and like writing about it and like talking about it. When you're dealing with Freemasonry, even in the Blue Lodge and the high degrees, I mean, you're dealing with elements of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, the occult, Kabbalah, mysticism, the mystery schools, Gnosticism, alchemy. I mean, this all gets blended into this stuff, comparative religion. This all gets mixed into Masonic symbolism and the rituals. The way it works is, I mean, it's not, you know, any state secret. If you want to become a Mason, you have to petition a Masonic lodge to join. Usually you have to know someone in the lodge to join, although there is a way around that if you do not know anybody and you want to join a Masonic lodge. There is a way around that. The way I joined was I knew I had a mutual friend of my mother and father's who was a Freemason, and in the summer of 1996, he wore the Masonic ring, the Masonic lapel pin, and in the summer of 96, I was out of college and not in law school yet. So I asked him, I just asked him point blank. I mean, you've probably heard the term to be one, ask one. So I just said, you know, I see you're a Freemason. I come from a line of long Maryland Masons. This is something that's always interested me. I want to join. He got me the petition. I filled it out. I submitted it with the fee. The Masons will set up an investigative committee to talk to you. They just pretty much want to make sure, you know, you're a torso, a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs, and not a raving maniac. They will ask you if you believe in God. That's one of the requirements. You can't be an atheist. You have to believe in a supreme being. And then if everything checks out, they will vote on you in the lodge. They will, you know, you'll have a vote. And you probably have heard the story, you know, where the blackball, someone being blackballed. Well, this is where the term comes from. You go into a little room and there's a bowl of white cubes and a bowl of black cubes. If you accept the candidate, you drop the white cube in to the ballot box. And if you don't want him, you drop the black cube in. You were blackballed. And it only takes one blackball to reject the candidate. It's rare that it happens. Most candidates are accepted. The reason for a rejection is usually someone in the lodge knows the person and perhaps they're owed money by this person, or somehow they were swindled by this person, you know, 5-6 years earlier, and they want to make amends. You know, they'll just say, look, if the guy pays me back the money, I'll vote, but, you know, otherwise I'm not going to allow him in. That's usually what causes the blackball. But anyway, I petitioned, I joined, I got in, no problem. And then to kind of lead into the next part of your question, you go through the rituals. The way it works is you go through the first one, which is entered apprentice. Once you take that, you have to perfect the catechism. It's a series of questions and predetermined answers that you have to memorize. And once you do that, you stand in front of the lodge and you perform the catechism, and then you can do the fellowcraft degree, and then so on till you reach the 3rd degree of Master Mason. It took me about 9 months to go through it. Some lodges operate differently. Some are very strict. Some are very liberal. Some will let you, when it comes to the catechism, some will simply allow you to read it off the paper. My lodge made me memorize it. And then once you go through the third degree, you're a Freemason, and you're entitled to all the benefits of the lodge. You can come to lodge meetings. You can participate in lodge activities. And again, you are then eligible for the high degree bodies, assuming you want to join them. They are voluntary. I joined the Scottish Rite because that's where all my family went. And it's the same thing. Only the one thing that I would stress, the big difference between the Scottish Rite and regular Blue Lodge Freemasonry is, in Blue Lodge Freemasonry, the rituals are participatory. You put on a costume, you walk around the lodge, you're blindfolded, you are participate in the lodge, in the ritual. In the Scottish Rite, it's more akin to watching a what's the word I'm looking at? A passion play. You sit in an amphitheater and watch actors on stage put on these morality tales, essentially. In the Scottish Rite, there are moments in it when it becomes participatory, but for the most part, you basically are just sitting in an amphitheater watching plays being played out in front of you. That's the degree structure of the Scottish Rite.
That's pretty.
Rob, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Derek.
No, I was saying that's really neat. It's interesting how this thing works out. You know, the catechism idea. It kind of reminds me of how the Presbyterians, for example, have catechisms. You've got the church. Like, this same tradition has ran all the way back.
Right. It's a predetermined answer with a predetermined answer. And you just stand there. The way the lodges do it is they're very lengthy, and it's a lot to memorize. So what the lodges usually do, and this is what my lodge did, is they will get a class together. So, like, for example, when I was initiated as an entered apprentice, it was January of 1997. So this would have been 22 years ago now. In fact, January 17th, it might have been to the night, actually. I mean, it was right around this time. So at any rate, but then what they'll do is they'll get other people. They'll initiate other people. They'll get a class of like 4 entered apprentices together. And then the catechism is divided amongst the 4 candidates, so you don't have as much to memorize. So, for example, when I went through it, like, I had to answer like 1 out of every 4 questions. Instead of answering all 100 questions, all I had to memorize was every 4th question. And some questions only have 1-word answers. So that makes it a lot easier, and it expedites it faster. You know, rather than having a guy have to memorize, like, you know, whatever the questions, I think it's 50, 60, 70 questions. They'll break it up, and you memorize like every 4th question. So that'll expedite. They'll wait till get a class together. And that's the way I did it. And then I did the entered apprentice in January. I did the fellow craft in May, and then I did the master mason in September of 1997.
You know, Rob, you sold me already on the eclectic idea. The fact that Freemasonry combines all these mystical traditions, you know, mystical Islam, Sufism, Kabbalah, mystical Christianity, presumably, and that makes it very attractive. It sounds very much like my ordination ritual for the Christian ministry that I went through. But I'm sure there's a whole range of motivations and satisfactions that people get from joining. Give us an idea of people's motivations for becoming Freemasons. We understand yours personally, but give us a glimpse into the range of those motivations and how maybe have they changed over the years?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Most people's motivation for joining, when I went through, and you know, through like the 70s and 80s, I joined in the 90s, was like to continue a family tradition. That was my motivating factor. I had grandfathers and great grandfathers. It skipped over my father; he didn't have an interest in it, but that was my interest in it. There was, you know, also people wanted. I was, like you pointed out during the intro, I was a member of a fraternity house at Gettysburg College. And what was interesting was the fraternity house I was a member of, that was, you nailed that, Lambda Chi Alpha. I cannot tell you how many people pronounce it Lambda Chi Alpha. You nailed it, though, Lambda Chi Alpha. The ritual for Lambda Chi Alpha was written by a Freemason, of all things. So I had a bit of kind of, you know, a heads up to what was coming when I joined Freemasonry. And I, like I said, as a child, when I was growing up, I was always interested in the mystical, you know, cryptozoology, ghosts, the supernatural. That just ran in my blood. And people like myself, I joined to continue on a family tradition. It could be community involvement. It could be wanting to be part of something bigger than yourself. These are, and to be honest, there's a negative aspect of it. Some people are talked into it by their families and they really have no, interest in it. That unfortunately can be a motivating factor as well. I'm of the belief that if you're interested in it and it's something in your heart, you should pursue it. But if not, leave it alone, and people often ask me like, well, I'm an atheist, but I'm going to join in anyway. Well, if you're an atheist, you're not going to have any genuine interest in it anyway. So, but those are my motivating factors. I do believe, and this is where we get into the 2000s and the advent of the internet. I mean, I do believe that there is definitely, without question, especially among millennials, an interest in Freemasonry in the esoteric, in the mystical side of it. This is something that I knew was there, but I really didn't discover it until after I joined it. It wasn't until after I joined it that I, was exposed to the works. I knew a little bit about Albert Pike and read some of his, but then you get into like Albert Mackey and then especially like Manly P. Hall. That's when I really started, to piece this all together and figure it out. And I am, like I said earlier, and in the camp that this does contain, these rituals and symbols are mystical in nature. Just to end, with millennials, there is definitely, and the advent of the internet, a element of interest in the occult and esoteric. This has been decidedly absent prior to the advent of the internet. Masonry, and there's a reason for that, is Masonry in the 1820s suffered a massive blow, something known as the William Morgan Affair, and it almost put Freemasonry out of business in the United States. It survived, but one of the consequences of the William Morgan Affair was Masonry had to distance itself from the occult, the esoteric side of things, and essentially reemerged as just a fraternal organization that helps widows and orphans. This was the philosophy that carried Masonry through the 19th century, through most of the 20th century, through the 80s, 70s, 80s, up until really the internet, where then people were being exposed on a much more easier basis to these Masonic mystical writers. And, there's definitely been a renewed interest in Freemasonry because of the esoteric side of things. I totally agree with that and would not refute that.
Wow. So if you don't mind, Rob, we're going to jump over here to your book for a second, because your book traces the origins of a higher ritual in Freemasonry named Enoch. Okay, yes. Who is Enoch, and what's his importance to Freemasonry? I want to say this because I know you want to jump right in that. Me and Luther have seen strange numbers, patterns, symbols, even in a lot of the literature. But anyway, this is your run with this, because I'm really interested in learning more about this.
Right. This is the thesis of my main book, and it's I'll do my best to condense the answer, but it's a very lengthy one. Enoch is a person in the Bible. He is one of two biblical figures never to experience physical death. It's him and the prophet Elijah. He is essentially transported into heaven and is exposed to what could be best described as esoteric wisdom through a bunch of angels and fallen angels known as the Watchers. They have fallen into ill repute with the Supreme Being because they have come down to earth and mated with human women, producing this race called the Nephilim. They are, and the story with them, with the giants and all that. I'm not going to get into that. The legend of Enoch, as it is in the Book of Enoch, and the Book of Enoch is left out of the Bible. It's very controversial. Is he interacts with these fallen angels, this group called the Watchers, and he learns information from them. They have taught humans how to read, write, arithmetic. Enoch comes back to earth and catches wind that the flood of Noah is coming, and because of that, he decides to trick the Supreme Being, and he takes this wisdom that he learns and buries it in a subterranean vault under 9 arches. He inscribes the mathematical wisdom on one pillar, and he describes the 7 liberal arts and sciences on another pillar. And in between the 2 pillars, he places the name of God, which is called the Tetragrammaton, on a golden delta, and he buries it in the ground. The whole purpose of this is to trick the Supreme Being, trick God, who is trying to eradicate mankind and eradicate this knowledge, this forbidden wisdom. Of course, the flood of Noah comes, and the treasure vault survives it. In Masonic lore, and this is the entire heart and soul of Freemasonry, is the recovery of this subterranean treasure vault. How does this tie into Freemasonry? I'm going to explain it. In the Masonic ritual in the Blue Lodge, there is a character who turns up in the third degree who is building King Solomon's temple. His name is Hiram Abiff. He is finishing the first temple of God. He possesses this name of God, this tetragrammaton. He has it. It is through the pronunciation of this word that all wisdom is made possible. As the temple is nearing completion, 3 fellow crafts want the name of God. They want this word, and they accost him. He's trying to leave the unfinished temple, and they accost him. And they say, give us the name. Well, they accost him one at a time. They say, give us the name, and he won't do it. He says, I'll tell you when the temple's done. I'll give you the name. They said, that's not good enough, and they murder him. They murder Hiram Abiff, and he's dead, and the word dies with him. It's what's called the lost word of a master mason. The candidate is playing Hiram Abiff, and he's killed. He's ultimately resurrected. Think a Christ-like figure. And when the candidate is resurrected, he has a substitute name of God whispered in his ear. It's not the real name of God. That's the end of the Blue Lodge ritual. The Blue Lodge Masons are forever running around looking for this lost word of a master mason. You move into the high degree rituals in the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, and you move forward in time to the Jewish people being exiled in Babylon under a Persian monarch named Cyrus the Great. And Cyrus decides to restore the temple in Jerusalem. So he dispatches a Jewish governor named Zorobabel, whose name literally means the heart of Babylon, back to the Holy Land to build the second temple. This is the temple that Jesus raises in the New Testament. This is the temple that Herod's temple. The second temple becomes Herod's temple. They go back to build the second temple, and the remnants of Solomon's temple are still there on the Temple Mount. As they are clearing the rubble away, they discover a trap door in the ground. It's sprung, and behold, here is the vault of Enoch that has survived the deluge of Noah. They go down, and there's the tetragrammaton, there's the lost wisdom. This is the 13th degree in the Scottish Rite. It's called the Royal Arch of Enoch. It's named after the biblical patriarch. It's the 7th degree in the York Rite. And the reason this is important is the candidate, by discovering this lost name of God, becomes godlike. It's a form of Kabbalistic ascensio or apotheosis. He becomes this godlike being, and in the Masonic ritual, that gives him express warrant to rule over other people. If you know your U.S. history, all the political leaders in this country were part of this high-degree system. The guy who ran it was a guy named DeWitt Clinton, who was a former governor of New York State and mayor of New York City. You had to have gone through this Royal Arch ritual and received this name of God. This was your express de facto warrant to rule in the United States in the early days, back in the day. This is how Masonry literally crafted the country. The ritual is important because it documents the recovery of this lost name of God. There's 2 things I should point out is, in the Masonic lore, before the Masons discover the treasure vault, the vault has been breached by 2 other people before the Masons get there. They're legendary figures. The first one is a character who comes out of Hellenistic Egypt known as Hermes Trismegistus. He is essentially the de facto god of magic. He goes down into the treasure vault. He sees the name of God, he pronounces it correctly, and restores the 7 liberal arts and sciences back to mankind. If you've got the symbolic eye, you will see Hermes everywhere around the library. This is why. The other character who goes into the treasure vault is Pythagoras, the Greek mathematician, who has his eureka moment, right? I have found it. In the vault of Enoch, I have found it, the name of God, pronounces it correctly, and restores mankind back to, restores mathematics back to mankind. The reason this is so important, and this is the entire thesis of my first book, is this Masonic ritual, what I've been talking about, is incorporating elements and components of the lost Book of Enoch, which was lost to history, to Western civilization from around the 2nd, 3rd century to around 1792, I believe it was, when James Bruce, a Scottish traveler, returned from Ethiopia with 3 copies of it. Those copies weren't even translated into English until 1821. The Masonic ritual that is crafted around this Book of Enoch was developed. It was part of the high degrees. It was originally called the Rite of Perfection. It comes out of Paris, France in the 1740s, 1750s. And there was someone out there who had knowledge of this Book of Enoch to incorporate it in to this Masonic ritual. This is the entire thesis of my first book. And why this ritual is so critical is because it's the recovery of this lost word of Hiram Abiff. When you understand it and you understand the importance within Freemasonry, it is where all the symbolism that is crafting the government, that is crafting the architecture of Washington, D.C., that is all this Masonic architecture. This is where a lot of it is coming out of.
So Rob, you're saying that the degrees are not equal. Some degrees within Freemasonry are more critical than others?
Yes, that is without question. This is a point of confusion that many people are not aware of. The degree structure in the Scottish Rite is out of order. You hear people say all the time the 33rd degree, the 33rd degree. That's important. That's, honorary. You have to be invited to that. But the most important degree in the Masonic ritual is the 13th degree in the Scottish Rite, and it's the 7th in the York Rite. It's the recovery. Believe it or not, a lot of the degrees that come after that take place prior to that ritual. You go back in time. The end of the Masonic story, the end of the Grail quest, the recovery of the Golden Fleece, call it what you will, is the recovery of this lost word of the Master Mason. That's the end of the story. That's the end of the Masonic journey, which is the 13th in the Scottish Rite. I would argue it's the most important critical ritual of all Freemasonry, outside of maybe the Blue Lodge 3rd degree. And it is really, if you understand it and you understand what's going on in the Blue Lodge and how it relates, you understand so much more of the symbolism that's coming out of Blue Lodge Freemasonry, tying into this high degree. Literally, it was what the United States was literally forged around.
So Rob, this 13th degree inspired you. It drove you to write the book. But as we understand, the entire story for the book came to you in a dream. Is that right?
No. The Royal Arch of Enoch was a product of 20 years. The Royal Arch of Enoch was is a history book. I mean, it's not fiction. It's a factual book. What happened was, the way that book got started was, I know where you're going with this. I'll get into what you're talking about. Was when I wrote the Royal Arch of Enoch, this was a history book. What tipped me off to this was, there was a book out there called, I forget the name of it off the top of my head. It's here in my library. It's a book, The Freemason's Guide to the Royal Arch by B.E. Jones. I was reading that book. This was years ago. And B.E. Jones cites a lecture by A.E. Waite, who is a Freemason and associated with the Rosicrucians, at least Neo-Rosicrucians, a very famous English mystic. And he was giving a lecture in London, and he was talking about this Royal Arch of Enoch ritual. And he actually said in the lecture, he said, well, this ritual is a retelling of this lost book of Enoch. And this is in this B.E. Jones book. What no one was putting together, what no one was connecting the dots to, was that this book was lost to history from the 2nd, 3rd century to 1821. So it immediately presents an anomaly. Well, then whoever is crafting this ritual must have had a copy of the Book of Enoch, at the very least a summary to it. So this was my motivation and my research that lasted for 20 years in writing the Royal Arch of Enoch. What you are referring to is, when I got done the Royal Arch of Enoch book, which was originally published in 2012, I immediately moved into my next book, which was called Symbolism, dealing with these occult themes and images in movies. That was a continuation of the final chapter of the Royal Arch of Enoch, where I talked about a lot of the Masonic, what I would call Enochic, solar symbolism in film. It was really a continuation of that chapter. And I was writing that, and it was in, that came out, so this would have been around April of 2013. I was writing Symbolism at that point in time, the first one. And out of nowhere, I went to bed one night. This would have been April of 2013 it was. I had this very lucid dream, this very vivid lucid dream that I usually, when I fall asleep, I don't have them. But this one seemed to last hours. I had dialogue. I had characters. It was a work of fiction. I mean, it was a story that was just presented to me in my dreams. I remember waking up very early, and I went over to my desk, and I always keep a pad of paper and a pencil nearby. And I just started outlining. This was like, 5:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock. I just started writing down these characters, these stories, the story that I just envisioned in this dream. And this dreamscape, this dream vision became my first work of fiction, called A Pact with the Devil. I liked the story. The dream was very lucid. And the characters, the dialogue, the names, I mean, it became my first work of fiction. And the reason why it was just so unique was, I've been on other shows, and a lot of people have told me that that in writing these books, I somehow tapped into a higher consciousness of some kind, a higher stream of thought, perhaps, and that this book somehow, like I'm a served as like an antenna almost to receive this information, to receive this book, this work of fiction. The one thing I can tell you is, when I first started doing this, I never intended to write a work of fiction, never. I wanted to write the Royal Arch of Enoch book, and I liked the movie symbolism stuff. But the story was just so interesting to me, and I just really liked it, and I liked the characters, and I liked the story, and I liked the twists and turns in it, that I thought, oh, okay, let me just start playing around with this on the side, and it became my first work of fiction. And me personally, I happen to love the story. It's very dark. It's very sinister. It's got conspiracy in it. It's very erotic. And it's out right now. It's called A Pact with the Devil. You can get it on Kindle or the print form.
That dream of yours was very momentous. Do you remember the date of it?
Yes, I do. It was actually, I believe the night that I fell asleep was April 16th, 2013. And the reason I specifically remember this is, if you go to the book, at the very introduction of the book is an author's admonition, which I believe is dated April 17th, 2013. I wrote that next morning. So the dream, I fell asleep, and I know that specifically. So the dream occurred on the night of April 16th into the early morning hours of the 17th of 2013.
I have to totally agree with you, man. Not to get really, I guess you'd say, too spiritual, but I've had some really strange experiences as well with dreams, and it was like something was talking to me. And
no, go ahead, Derek. Get spiritual.
I'm gonna tell you, like I have experienced some things. I mean, I think each one of us, I know Luther has. I've experienced some things where things were said to me, and it was almost like whether it was verbal or subconscious or within my gut, but they came true.
Yeah, sure.
It happened. It was real, and I just kept telling myself, I can't close the gate off. I mean, personally, I'm going to be honest with you, like, I personally don't buy into the typical story of what we understand a God to be or a higher power to, what people say. The typical understanding of that, I don't buy into. I think a lot of that is man has anthropomorphized and put a lot into it. But it's too much to say that I know for certain that there isn't something going on, and I'm very highly open to it because I've experienced it. In fact, that same premonition that takes place within the dream, I've communicated internally and asked for it to help me overcome addiction. And look, I went from death and shooting up heroin to today I'm clean and I'm helping thousands across the world with my recovery. So I'm not trying to plug that in here because
no, it's wonderful. I quit drinking. I never considered myself an alcoholic, but I was drinking too much. And in September of 13, I stopped cold turkey because it was no longer good for me. So good for you on that. I mean, that's wonderful. I've been clean and sober now since September 2013. Have no interest in going back to it and never would. But no, you are spot on with what you're saying. I've had similar experiences to what you're talking about that I can relate to. What's happened and what my experiences are and I've been asked about this on other shows about UFOs and ghosts. I've experienced one ghost and I've experienced one UFO. The one thing that's happened to me that's very unique is twofold. One is, for whatever reason now, when I look back on memories and past memories, especially the older ones, going back like 5-10 years or older, when I have those memories, the memories are not viewed from me as me seeing them. I'm watching myself. I don't know if that makes sense. Like if I go back to college, the memory is me watching myself do something, walk around, go into a party, something like that. It's not remembered as me seeing it myself. That's number one. But the one thing that's happened to me in my life that's been very peculiar, that it's only happened a couple of times, and it's always very innocuous, is it's completely innocuous. It's not anything drastic or scary or life-shattering. I will just be like sitting there watching TV or a movie or playing a video game, and I'll have a vision in my head that's very lucid, and it'll be something akin to walking down a shopping center's aisle or in a supermarket's aisle while a particular song is playing. And it'll last for like 3 seconds, and that's it, 3 or 4 seconds. 10 years later, it'll happen. And I'll say to myself, I remember this. I remember picturing this 10 years ago, and here it is happening. And that's happened more than once to me. And it's never anything serious. It's never like a car accident or something earth-shattering. It'll be something like I'll be outside, like, mowing the lawn with a song playing, or in a supermarket with a song playing, or, looking at something on the shelf with a particular, it's always something completely innocuous, but there it is. I'll be like, I visioned this 10 years ago. I visioned this exact same scene 10 years ago. That is without question happened to me, and I can't explain it.
I totally agree with you. I think Luther does too. Did you want to comment before I ask any questions, Luther?
I sure can identify with that, Derek. I think the forms and structures of Masonry can give fullness to some of these spiritual experiences, because if you don't have a framework, you don't want to share, you just don't want to tell anybody, and it just remains interior and it's not of any use to anybody. But just like the three of us right now, we feel comfortable in voicing some of these deep experiences that we've had. I've talked with many Christians who can't find that kind of a framework in Orthodox Christianity, but in the esoteric traditions, that gives them the expression that they're looking for. I was a Methodist growing up, and at one time a Methodist pastor. And you have a lot of Freemasons in the Methodist tradition, Rob.
Sure.
You may be aware. Those Masons are not Scottish Rite for the most part. They are African American, and they are Prince Hall Masons. I'm not quite sure what the difference is right there. Maybe you can enlighten us somewhat. But I became aware that there were many Freemasons in the congregation, and sometimes they would wear pins. And identifying them as Masons. And as pastor, I preferred that they not do that during service, because I wanted everybody to focus on the transcendency of God, or consciousness, or what it is we were doing. But I didn't have anything against it outside of that. If we would have church meetings or something like that, then I knew that, we had Masons in the midst. And it was the strangest thing. I remember one meeting that was being set up, and one of the church directors I was working with set the chairs up in a certain way. I had already laid the chairs out. He was a Mason, and he redid the chairs. Rob, what is that about?
Oh, I don't know. That sounds kind of peculiar. I don't know. In the lodges, maybe he was setting it up subconsciously based on a Blue Lodge scenario. That's the only thing I can think of. It's certainly odd. The Prince Hall, it's interesting you bring that up. I'm not an expert on Prince Hall. I don't claim to be. Prince Hall is essentially the African American lodges. It's exclusively African American. The issue, the problem that stemmed with the Prince Hall lodges was a lot of the Grand Lodges in the States refused to recognize them. And when you can see the problem, right off the bat, that this is going to create, is this a racist organization? It was a problem. The Masons, the lodges that were recognized wrote it off as they weren't doing the rituals correctly. My understanding is, and my understanding is that essentially, this was going to be very, when you had the advent of the internet age, this could obviously present some very negative PR for the obvious reason. My understanding is that all the Grand Lodges now recognize the Prince Hall Lodges. I know that's the way it is in Maryland. But, for a while, the Prince Hall Lodges were never, they existed, but they were never recognized by some of the Grand Lodges. My understanding now is that's all changed, that all the Grand Lodges recognize all the Prince Hall Lodges.
Interesting. Do you have African Americans who are Scottish Rite? Is that yes. You can. There is no in a lodge. There should be no racial requirement to join a lodge or anything like that. I would be vehemently. All Masons would be vehemently against that, myself included. I will say to you that there are some lodges that are very arcane, that hold to traditions. Like, for example, the Amicable St. John's Lodge that I joined for years, it's the oldest lodge in Baltimore, was the Jewish Lodge. If you were Jewish, this is the lodge you went to.
I mean, it was just the way it was. I mean, it wasn't exclusionary per se, but that was just the way it was. They changed all that. When Masonry started to decline, obviously people of different, I'm kind of non-denominational deist. So, I walked in, but, with the advent of the internet and things like that, I mean, this is all changed now where, people of, different ethnicities are admitted. The standard is, do you believe in a supreme being? The ethnicity, none of that should matter. It should never matter to join a Masonic lodge. As long as you believe in a supreme being and literally on a stark raving maniac, you can join. A lot of the Prince Hall guys, depending on the jurisdiction, and this also, you could see where this was causing a problem, was the Prince Hall lodges would not be recognized by, per se, the Grand Lodge, but the Scottish Rite would recognize them. So the Prince Hall guys could go into the Scottish Rite buildings, but, they weren't being recognized by the Grand Lodge. So, I mean, what's the sense? This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it was really this, probably, I would say in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this, movement where the Grand Lodges just basically were like, look, just recognize the Prince Hall lodges. This is going to cause more problems than it solves. And now all the Prince Hall lodges are recognized by the Grand Lodges. But I mean, if you are of a different race, I mean, if you're Chinese or whatever, Japanese, you should have no problem. I mean, no one should be excluding you because of that in a lodge system. If that was the case, I would be very disappointed to hear that. But my understanding is that just doesn't happen anymore. It shouldn't, at any rate.
So, Rob, if you don't mind, in that same vein, because we're talking about Masons in general here, what is the it seems that some Freemasons aren't happy campers with your writings, okay? And
right.
What's been the most hostile reaction that you've received?
Right. Most Freemasons like the book. It's funny that you mentioned that. It's a very good question. The part that I thought was going to be controversial wasn't, and the thing that I didn't think controversial caused the problem. My understanding, when I wrote the book, I mean, the book is controversial. I don't back off of that. It may not be for everybody. I own that. Most of the Masons, most of them who have read it, like it. There was actually, I won't name him, but this was years ago. I was actually on a radio show hosted by a Freemason who just snapped on me. I mean, and he just started calling me demonic and evil, and he kind of lost all control, and I eventually got hung up upon, and he invited, I mean, it was just a total debacle. The controversial element, well, there's a comparative religion study in the book, which I thought was controversial, but that wasn't really the problem. The problem was that that it's the whole idea that the wisdom that is being preserved by Enoch is stemming from demons, essentially, from fallen angels. So, in a way, the Freemasons are the preservers of this lost, forbidden wisdom that is coming from demons. That's where there is some problems with this, and this is where the hostility comes in. Where that I've met is, that this was the controversial aspect that I didn't anticipate, because it deals with, and it comes right out of the Book of Enoch, is the whole idea of God, how can I say this without trying to sound controversial? It's the whole notion of divine evil. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a doctrine that's embodied in a theory called universalism. And a lot of the Scottish Rite and a lot of the Masons were universalists in the early days. And what universalism is this notion that in the very end of days, even Satan and all the demons in hell get admitted into heaven. In the end of days, God even forgives them and lets Satan out, and basically forgives all the demons and lets them into heaven, and it is forgiven. The idea is in the Book of Enoch, and I say this and this is where you have the clash with the Old Testament and the Book of Enoch, is in the Old Testament, the evil is definitely considered evil. This is what God is trying to eradicate with the flood of Noah. In the Book of Enoch, even though the wisdom is coming from this fallen angel coterie, the wisdom is considered divine. It's even considered godly, even though it's coming from this race of fallen angels. So this is the controversial element that I've run into. Like I said, most Masons, I mean, I'd say 98% of them don't have a problem with it. And, I've lectured in Masonic halls about, on the Book of Enoch and on the Royal Arch of Enoch. So most of them that I've met don't have a problem with it, but I have encountered a few that this doesn't go over with too well. But, I mean, it's right there in the Masonic literature. I mean, you read T.S. Webb's Monitor Illustrations of Freemasons. I mean, he talks about Enoch concealing this wisdom and burying it to trick, the God of the Old Testament, and preserving it, and Pythagoras and Hermes, and that, that this wisdom is restored in this lost, this lost wisdom is restored in this 13th degree. I guess, I mean, this was part of the crux of anti-Masonry back in the day. I mentioned earlier about the William Morgan affair. This was part of it, is that the Masons were part of this sort of black cabal, preserving this, forbidden wisdom of some kind. This is definitely a controversial element. And if you're interested, and like I said, not trying to do a shameless plug here, but it's really the thesis of my book, The Royal Arch of Enoch. So if you're interested in what I'm talking about, by all means, check out the book.
Please do.
Well, it is controversial, Rob, but it's also noble, the thought about ultimate reconciliation, even with the devil and his angels, right?
Oh, of course. One of the high degree, when I talk about universalism, the high degrees of Freemasonry, and I have to stress this, I should stress this to be fair, that we were talking about high degree system of Freemasonry. This is not Blue Lodge Freemasonry per se. We're really talking about the higher degrees here. I should stress that. The high degrees, and you're going to get into a lot of deep history here. It's very controversial history. But, it's really a long talking point. I'll do my best to try to condense this. Blue Lodge Freemasonry comes out of England, okay? It comes out of England in 1717. This is when Blue Lodge Freemasonry, the first 3 degrees, come onto the history pages. I totally agree with you. I know what people are saying out there. Oh, it may existed in some form or fashion before that. I don't disagree with you. I agree. There were Masonic lodges. There were these operative Masonic guilds, Scotland, the continent of Europe, building these Gothic cathedrals. I do not dispute that. Masonry is organized in 1717, and it comes out of England, London specifically. The high degrees are different. They come out of Paris, France. And you got to really know your Masonic history here. 4 years after Masonry is created, a Presbyterian minister named James Anderson writes the Constitutions of Freemasons. This is the bylaws of Freemasonry, but in it he gives this legendary history of Masonry, dating Masonry all the way back to the Tower of Babel, these biblical stone builders. I mean, Adam, the fig leaf in the garden, is a Masonic apron, and God taught Adam Freemasonry. It was the first thing he did. No Mason takes this literally. It's a legendary history. This is what is part of the Masonic lore. Is this, then it's handed down. This Masonic lore. These building techniques build the pyramids. They build the Gothic cathedrals. In 1737, an Englishman living in France by the name of the Chevalier Ramsay, he comes along, and this is where we have a problem, where he comes out and he says, Anderson, I don't disagree with you about the Masons building the cathedrals, and I don't really even get into you with the the biblical stuff. He said, but Masonry is Roman Catholic. He said Freemasonry is the pure Roman Catholic religion. He said, and here's why I know this. It's called the Oration of Ramsay. It's issued in 1737. He said Freemasonry comes from this medieval warrior monk class that ran around the Middle Ages called the Knights Templar. He said, and the Templars are the inventors of Freemasonry, and that Masonry is the pure Roman Catholic religion, and that Masonry comes from these ancient mystery schools from the Middle East, Sufism, the cult of Mithras, Pythagoras, the mysteries of Eleusis, the Osirian mysteries. The Templars brought this lost mystery school remnants back to Europe. They were exoterically Catholic, but they embedded all this comparative religion, and this is where Freemasonry comes from. oration. This is where you have the split within Freemasonry. This is where the whole Knights Templar element comes into Freemasonry. And he writes this oration. It's called Ramsay's Oration of 1737. And this oration births the high degree system, what is known as the Rite of Perfection. Where does this come from? This is being crafted by the Jesuits in the College of Claremont. And the reason they're doing this is part of what's called the Counter-Reformation. Everyone knows of the Reformation of Martin Luther. The Jesuits were charged with the Counter-Reformation. What is the sole purpose of the Counter-Reformation? Its sole motivation was one thing: destroy England and destroy the Church of England specifically. They never forgot the Henrican settlement where Henry VIII tossed out the Jesuits, tossed out the Catholic Church, created the Church of England, and enshrined himself as Pope, which exists to this day, where the English monarch is head of the English Church. The Catholic Church and the Jesuits never forgot this, and they created the high degrees of Freemasonry as a counter-Reformation subterfuge ruse to undermine England and to restore the Stuart Catholics back to the throne. When you understand that, and you understand that interplay and the difference, and this is where you get into this Roman Catholic, Jesuit, Knight Templar element coming into it, which goes completely contrary to the Blue Lodge philosophy. This is when you will start making sense of this split, the history, the codification of the Scottish Rite, the York Rite. And what the whole thing was doing was, the whole motivation of this is it was continuing these rituals and saying, oh, you think you have the secrets in the Blue Lodge. We've got the secrets. We've got the name of God. And it begs the question, and this is the entire crux of the Royal Arch of Enoch book, is whoever is crafting this ritual knew something, had access to a book of Enoch. And what you will come to understand, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, is that this ritual is conveying some sort of lost history. That if you look at the ritual, the discovery of treasure on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, must have happened. This must have been some sort of lost history that the Templars discovered something over there and smuggled it back, and it's being mirrored in this Masonic ritual that is actually trying to convey lost yet legitimate history. I am absolutely 100% convinced of that, and that is why this ritual in particular is so critical, because it is probably documenting some sort of lost yet Masonic lost Templar history that actually happened.
So let me grab a thread of that, Rob. The Jesuits, who were vehemently opposed to these original Reformation impulses, did that follow Reformed theology even outside of England? I mean, Derek, you can speak to this because you've identified with the Reformed tradition. I never really identified with it, but I know that you have. So is that what has happened, that there's been this tradition that is opposed to the Reformation and what came out of it?
Absolutely. It's called the Counter-Reformation. It was created, I forget it, is in the 1560s. It was created by the Roman Catholic Church. It's called the Counter-Reformation. I forget the name of the council that met. It's in my book. It's just escaping me right now. It's in the 1500s. And essentially the Jesuits were put in charge of destroying the Protestant church using subterfuge. And you will find this throughout history. I mean, the Jesuits are behind the Spanish Armada, where they tried to invade England and topple Queen Elizabeth. The Guy Fawkes blowing up a parliament in 1605 with the Protestant James I. That's a Jesuit counter-reformation ploy. 1666, the Jesuits burnt London to the ground in the Great Fire. Then you have, but what happened is, and you have to understand English history, in the 1640s, you have this English Civil War, where the English monarch, who was head of who was head of the English Church. Remember, the Church of England is a Protestant church. It's a Protestant. The English monarch, it's this way to this day, is head of church and state. The English monarch, Queen Elizabeth, right now is a pope. She's the head of the Church of England. She is not only the monarch, but she's head of the Church of England. In the 1640s, the Church of England, Henry VIII separated it from Rome. It's a Protestant church, the Church of England. In the 1640s, the monarch is Charles I. The problem you have is his wife is Catholic. And what happens is this causes tremendous stress among the countryside, where they begin to see a Roman Catholic influence invading the Church of England. So much so that there's an English Civil War. The parliamentary forces actually capture Charles I and cut his head off. It's that bad. The forces of Oliver Cromwell actually rise up. He's a Puritan. He's a Protestant. They capture Charles I. They try him for treason and cut his head off. And for the first time in history, you have a Commonwealth. You have a republic in England. Essentially, what happens is Cromwell falls, and Charles II is invited back to rule. He's Protestant, no problem. He never marries. He dies. His brother comes to the throne, who's Catholic. Problem. 1688, we have the Glorious Revolution in England, where he is deposed and tossed out. They resurrect. It's called resurrecting the bones of Oliver Cromwell, and they toss out James II. In 1701, they have the Settlement Act, which forbids a Roman Catholic forever sitting on the English throne again. And William and Mary, after the Stuarts, after Queen Anne, are invited to rule, and this problem finally goes away. And that's kind of the end almost of the Counter-Reformation at that point, where the Jesuits were trying to destroy England. The high degrees are burned to the ground. But then you have Freemasonry. And the Jesuits seize upon this. They seize upon this very popular Protestant group coming together, of men, and they see this as a threat. So let's resurrect the Counter-Reformation, and they create these high degrees as a way to try to restore the old Stuart pretenders, the Catholic side of the Stuarts, back to the throne of England. It doesn't work in the end. It eventually fades. But what the residue is the high degrees become very popular. Not so much in London because of who they associate with, because they associate with the French and the Jesuits, the arch enemies of the English people. But in places like Wales, in Scotland, the high degrees catch on. And then, of course, in the United States, you have the revolution in 1776. Well, who's our ally? The French, to defeat England. Well, where are the high degrees coming from? France. So the high degrees in this country become very popular. But I would stress to the listeners, by that point in time, the Jesuits are out of the picture, although what they create is like Frankenstein's monster. They're out of it, but their monster remains. That makes sense.
Luther, this is intense, and you have released a lot here, Rob. And I mean, I can only imagine there's so much mystery and, if you will, shrouded stuff around Masonry for so many people. Whatever lodge you might be part of, they're always thinking conspiratorial. So something that me and Luther have been famously known for recently is dealing into, I guess you'd say, synchronistic ideas and stuff. And so you talk about how, well, the Blue Lodge, the third degree ritual as a solar Osirian metaphor, or astrotheology, resurrected sun god man, comparative religion with Christianity. Can you go a little bit into that? Because that's something, I'll be honest, like what made my eyes open for me to get out of the Orthodox position and to really say, whoa, I'm really missing the truth here, was seeing all these religions having similar truths, and that they're borrowing from each other.
Sure, absolutely. It's a study in comparative religion, and it's a study of Neoplatonism, which was a philosophy that comes out of the 2nd, 3rd century, which was a twining of paganism and Christianity. It's called neo-paganism because, Neoplatonism, because it has to do with Plato's Republic, where Plato equated God to the sun, essentially. And what happens in the Blue Lodge in this third degree ritual, you can compare it to Osiris. I mean, you'll clearly see this overlap with Christianity, with this, where Hiram Abiff is this architect. I mean, remember, Jesus was the carpenter. So we have the builder figure who's constructing Solomon's temple, who's betrayed. Right. I mean, we have these three fellowcraft who betray him. I mean, you could look at this as the Judas Iscariot type figure in the Osirian mysteries. If you want to equate Hiram Abiff to Osiris, the sun god, the dying sun god, which is what Hiram is, this would be the Set character, or Seth, or Typhon character, if you wanted to put it in Hellenistic terms. So we have Hiram Abiff as this solar god figure building the temple. He's betrayed, he's killed, he's buried, and the identifying marker for his grave is a sprig of acacia. That is a flower sacred to the sun god Apollo. So we have a solar allegory there. And then Hiram Solomon, obviously it's noticed that Hiram is missing, and Solomon assembles 12 fellowcrafts to go looking for his body, go looking for him, or find out what happened to him. This is, of course, in Christianity, the 12 apostles, or the 12 houses of the zodiac, comparatively, who are going looking for their lost solar ruler. They find the sprig of acacia, identifying it, and identify as this must be where he's buried, and they ultimately resurrect him. They resurrect him from the grave. And this is where you get into this deep comparative Egyptian mystery school take on this, where they try resurrecting. When you go through the Blue Lodge, part of it is grips, handshakes, which I'm sure you're aware of. These are identifying markers that is how you can identify one Mason from another. They try raising him with the grip of an apprentice, and it doesn't work. It fails. Then they try resurrecting him with the grip of the second degree. That fails. So they resurrect him. They resurrect him on the third time, right? 3 days dead, right? Third time. And they resurrect him for the third time with what's known as the grip of the lion's paw, the strong grip of a lion's paw. This is what's known as the grip of a master mason. Lion's paw, Leo, ruled by the sun, solar allegory. When he is resurrected, he is met upon what is called the 5 points of fellowship. That is a body gesture that is made. I won't get into it. You can look it up online. These 5 points are a pentagram. 5 points, pentagram. If you are familiar with Masonry and its symbols, one of the symbols of Masonry is a pentagram. A pentagram can symbolize many things. If it is 2 points up and 1 point down, it is left-hand path Kabbalah, the goat of Mendes, negative energy. If it is 1 point up and 2 points down, it's Pythagorean, it's mystery school, it's white magic, no problem. In Masonry, it's 1 point up, 2 points down, and it represents, in Masonry, you read this in all the Masonic literature, it represents the Egyptian goddess Isis. It's the symbol for the dog star Sirius. Isis is Osiris's virgin consort, okay? Right? This is Egyptian mythology. Osiris, like Hiram, is betrayed and killed. You with me so far? How does Isis resurrect Osiris? Okay, she has the secret name of God. This is the secret name of the god Amun, Re, or Ra. This is the sort of the sun god above Osiris. She has his secret name. Whatever this name was, it's lost. We don't know what this is anymore. She has this name. Her star in the stellar pantheon is Sirius. Okay, Osiris is Orion. They're next to each other. The candidate is raised on 5 points, forming a pentagram, symbolizing Isis. He has the name of God, a substitute name, whispered in his ear. That's how he's brought back to life. This is paralleling how Osiris was brought back to life by Isis, by having the secret name of Amun, Re, Ra. It's a study in comparative religion with a decidedly Christian twist to it. Pardon my, we're dealing with the ancient Egyptian mysteries, stellar theology, solar theology, dealing with these solar motifs, symbols. So the Hiram Abiff legend ritual is rotating around the legend of Osiris, the sun god who is killed and resurrected, brought back to life. You ultimately hear brought back to life on the 5 points of fellowship, a pentagram symbolizing his virgin consort Isis, who has the secret name that she used to resurrect him, which is the name of Amun, Re, Ra, and she resurrects the candidate. You will often hear the term, right, the widow's son. Freemasons are the son of the widow's son. The widow is Isis, who is widowed upon the death of Osiris. That's where that phrase comes from. That is a complete study in comparative mythology, comparative Egyptian religion. This symbolism, this solar symbolism, is carried forward in the high degrees. I mean, when you get into the high degree, the Royal Arch, this astrological Egyptian solar symbolism is completely continued. I mean, what I'm saying to you is not a stretch. I mean, this is when you get into the Royal Arch, before you go to the Holy of Holies, and this subterranean treasure vault, you pass through 4 veils. What do the 4 veils feature? It's a man, an ox, a lion, and an eagle. I mean, it's Scorpio, Leo, Aquarius, and Taurus. It's a solar journey. It's a solar annual journey that the candidate is going on. when they spring the treasure door and the treasure trap, and they find the subterranean treasure, it's noon, the sun's overhead. That's how it's illuminated. So immediately you have this immediate nexus formed between the tetragrammaton, the name of God, and the sun. It's Plato's Republic, it's Neoplatonism, it's Egyptian solar symbolism. If you're interested, read The Royal Arch of Enoch. I explain it in much more depth in that book. And again, that book was a product of 20 years of experience, of research and writing, and my own experience in the Masonic Lodge. So it's a lot of deep, what's fascinating about this is what I've just given you is only one interpretation of this. There's other ones. I mean, you can look at this as just on its face, that it's Hiram Abiff building Solomon's temple, and he's betrayed by the fellow craft, and he's resurrected, he's restored. And then you get into the high degrees with the recovery of the name of God, where the candidate becomes this godlike figure, this apotheosis occurs. Remember, the Blue Lodge rituals, this is coming out of England in 1717. Many people have interpreted what the ritual I just described as the English Civil War, what I talked about, where Hiram Abiff is Charles I. And he is murdered, betrayed by Oliver Cromwell and the parliamentarians. He is killed, he's executed, and then he's ultimately resurrected when Charles II takes the throne. And then you move to the Catholic high degrees with the recovery and the restoration of the name of God is the attempts by the Jesuits to restore the Stewart Pretenders. So you can look at this politically, this ritual as a political allegory as well, which is also a fascinating study. So it's a lot of deep history, it's a lot of deep symbolism, and I hope I've shed some light on this, but it's something that's just fascinating to me. And again, if you like it, by all means, please check out the Royal Arch of Enoch book.
Tremendous, Rob. It's intriguing. And I'm going to blend my next two questions. Let's see. If you get into these kinds of depths in symbolism, really expressions of the profound values of life, isn't it difficult to return to a world where you're just a human being taking out the trash again? I mean, is there a disconnect among Masons where the craft has you in a different world than the world that you function every day? That's my first question, but let me blend it into this one.
It's a very good question.
So, the practical business of setting up a country, okay, the United States,
yes,
set up according to Masonic doctrine.
Correct.
What's the advantage in setting up a nation, which is a very practical enterprise, according to Masonic doctrine? What's the advantage for the country, and what's the advantage for the founders? Tell me something about how that works.
Sure. They're both very good questions. What I would say to you on the first question is, I definitely view things differently now. I feel like almost that the Masonic rituals, going through them and then going through the high degrees, I almost feel like, for me personally, and I don't know if this will make sense, but I'll do my best to explain. To me, it was like a Gnostic revelation, that I was awakening to a higher Godhead. I don't want to say it sounds too mystical or pagan or anything like that, but what I'm trying to say is, when I went through the rituals, it was just a ritual. It was when I started researching it and when I started going into the depths of the symbolism of it, that's when I really began to connect the dots and understand this. I will say this to you, not all Masons do it. Masonry, Albert Pike talks about this, basically Masonry puts you on the path, you walk it. Many Masons will go through the rituals and just go back to their perfunctory lives and not look any further into it. You got to look at the books of Albert Mackey. I mean, you've got to sit there, as I did on many a lonely night. Now, I'm not saying to feel sorry for myself because it was worth it. Pouring through these boring, dense books by Albert Pike, Albert Mackey, Manly P. Halls, the Madame Blavatskys of the world. And the information's out there, but it's all in different places. It's scattered. And you got to bring it together. For me, it was profound. I mean, it changed my life. I could still function. I mean, I still watch, sporting events and stuff like that. But I do watch it with a kind of heightened sense, if that makes sense to you. And this is especially true. There was a side effect to this that I did not anticipate at all. There was a side effect to this that I did not see coming, and that was watching film and artistic expression differently. because I see things that this is where, when I watch artistic expressions, movies and TV shows, I see things on a much more subconscious level and archetypal level and symbolic level. I can see through these movies and see what these movie makers are going through on a much readily easier basis than I could ever before. And that was sort of a unique side effect to this. The second question about the founders, it's a great question. So, why did the founders use Freemasonry as a template to create the country around? Well, here we go. We have 1776. They're falling out of favor with England. They don't want the founders knew what they didn't want. They did not want a monarchy. George Washington had the famous line, what was it? I did not defeat George III to become George I. So they didn't want a monarchy, and they did not want a Vatican-styled religious organization dictating. They did not want a state-sanctioned religion. So what fraternity do we all belong to, where there are these egalitarian democratic values where a man can hold whatever religion he wants to freely without without being persecuted, or alternatively, be an atheist. If you want no religion whatsoever, Freemasonry. We all seem to belong to this. We all treat each other as equal brothers when we go into this. It's governed by 3 branches, right? A worshipful master, a senior warden, and a junior warden. Why not create 3 co-equal branches of government based upon that? And again, this is another, I'll just diverge for a second. This whole idea of the 3 branches of government, the separation of power in the government, coming from the Masonic Lodge, is solar. This has to do with the sun, the 3 stages of the sun. The sun in the morning in the east as the rising sun. This is where the worshipful master sits. The sun in the south at noonday, at meridian, at high point. And then the setting sun in the west, which is where the senior warden sits. So the whole triple division is the triple division of the movement of the sun in Blue Lodge Freemasonry, and of course this filters into the government. But of course, you also have the founders there. We belong to this fraternal order. It's egalitarian, it's democratic, it promotes religious freedom, and it has an operating constitution. We have the constitutions of the Freemasons put out by Anderson in 1721. Talking about all this, talking about how these power structures work, about the triple division of government. Wow, maybe we should rely upon that. There's no monarchy. When you join a Masonic lodge, the lowest, a serf could sit next to the Prince of Wales. There's no division. There's no, segregation or anything like that. You all sit amongst yourself as equal brothers, as equals. That appealed to them. The idea of the idea of no concentrated power, where you have the president, the legislature, and the judiciary, are co-equal branches of government. So you have the Constitution as a Masonic document. The founders, this seemed to work for them. They kind of liked it. Like I said, it wasn't a monarchy, and there was no Vatican, so this is what they turned to. And you will find the fingerprints of Masonry, and of course I've talked about this on other shows, not only on the Constitution and the creation of the government, of course the architecture, and the streetscapes and the city planning. This all comes out of Masonry as well. The designs, the templates, things like that.
This is quite interesting because my next question I had for you it delves into astrotheology once again, and I'm begging you to come back. Everybody, you got to get his book, but this is something I would definitely want to have him on another show on, because I have a gut feeling you could probably do an entire show talking about astrotheology alone. And
I could. I have a whole. It's a study in comparative religion.
Right.
I'll let you answer your question, but what a lot of the Masonic writers talk about, and myself included, is what seems to have happened here is, and I don't know if it was psychological or conscious, there must have been an element of consciousness in this, is that when you have the crafters of these religions, they are obviously relying on mystery school templates. This is what Manly P. Hall kind of laments almost in his book. When he talks about Jesus, he kind of says, when he talks about Christ, he says it's a shame that 300 years after Christ's death at the Council of Nicaea, the pagans took over his religion and crafted a solar religion around it. And you have this Neoplatonic imagery going on. So there is this almost lamentation within Masonry of astrotheology, but it's there. I mean, it's clearly there, this comparative religion study with this. I mean, it's irrefutable. It's fascinating to me. So go ahead. I could definitely talk about it more and more. I mean, you can get into it with me now if you want to. I mean, I don't have a problem.
I want to save some questions because I think we're going to eat some popcorn and go to the movies here in just a second, just to touch on a few things, because we could delve deeper into some of these things. And what I was actually going to ask you, because me and Luther, I had a chit chat with Luther not long ago. Look at me, Luther, eating that popcorn. Be careful with that $9 popcorn right there that you just bought from the movies. What I was going to ask you, because I said to Luther, I said, man, I feel like we're getting closer. The whole goal is to seek what the truth really is in terms of what is really going on in the biblical text, because it's so controversial. I mean, everybody has a take on it. And I started to recognize something from someone who does sacred geometry. We had him on a show, and we call him, pretty much he's Sacred Geometry Decoded, which is actually a YouTube channel. And he talks about Jesus being the chief cornerstone. He talks about a lot of Masonic symbolism and mathematics that are Pythagorean and how it all ties together and so forth. So do you think Jesus in this, I figured I'd ask this question rather than getting too much into the astrotheology, because I want to save that for a show in the future. Do you think Jesus is a real man in this story, or is he possibly symbolic and Masonic in nature, that he represents building structures in a craft rather than an actual individual man? What are your thoughts on him? Maybe just go into some detail. I'm all for the heretic stuff, so please help me.
Well, that's a very controversial question. It is. Jesus is often it's a deep question. I get into this. Jesus is called the cornerstone. Or in Masonry, this is also the keystone. This is the keystone that the builders reject. And the reason the builders reject this is because it's a block that's neither square or rectangular. Have you ever seen a keystone? So Jesus is always considered the keystone that the builders reject, which is again a royal arch symbol. It's a solar symbol. You can't have an arch without a keystone. To make a long story short, what does a keystone do? It binds. It binds the other blocks to it. You have the blocks going up on an arch, and then the keystone, which has the kind of diagonal lines on one side, and then the others, it unites the blocks, right? Are you with me? This is why what happened. I mean, I'm going to get to your question, but this is a good little symbolic story. What happened during the American Revolution? You had 13 colonies being united as one. Okay, right? Where was the Declaration of Independence? Where these blocks, these states were united as one. It was Philadelphia. Where was the Constitution signed? Philadelphia. Where did the 13 colonies become one? Right? It's Pennsylvania. This is why Pennsylvania is the keystone state, because it's the unification of the colonies into one. The Jesus story. I believe that the Jesus story, as it laid out in the Bible. I mean, yes, there could have been a real Jesus figure. The story that strikes me is laid out in the Bible is astrotheological, and in the Old Testament as well. Could there have been like a Jewish rabbi rebel running around the early first century? Of course, yeah, I wasn't there. I mean, is it? Of course, but I mean, there are so many symbolic things are surrounding Jesus. I mean, and Moses and the Old Testament, and the creators of a lot of the Christian church fathers really struggled with this, with the comparative religion side of it. I mean, even with like the Gnostic side of this, it was the God of Jesus, the God of the Old Testament, because the God of the Old Testament and the God of Jesus have nothing in common. So there were a lot of Christian writers who said, well, there's two gods out there. You have the God of Moses, who hates people, wants to kill people, wants to destroy people and test them, and you have the God of Jesus, who wants to forgive everybody and love everybody. This is two separate entities that these guys are praying to here. But and then you have the Christian fathers saying, "Oh no, this is the same God. This is one God." And Jesus comes from the same one. So you have that controversy. But no, I mean, if you get into, I get into this in the book. I mean, with the whole idea of, I mean, if you want to look at it from a comparative religion, astrotheological standpoint, I know you want to ask about this. Where you have, Jesus being the solar avatar. the 12 apostles being the 12 houses of the zodiac. You have the whole idea of the procession of the equinoxes, with Jesus being the sun in the house of Pisces, which is coming to an end. Of course, you have the fish symbolism of Pisces all over Jesus. The fisher of men, things like that. What's the symbol for Pisces? The feet. What's Jesus do? He just washes people's feet, right? The opposite house of Pisces is Virgo, the virgin, Pisces, virgin birth, right? Then you have the old house of the sun, which is Moses, Aries. This is the fire worship, where the burning pillar, the burning bush is where Moses gets the name of God, talks to God through. Aries is a fire sign. You have Moses with the ram's horns, denoting Aries. So you can look at the Bible as, a measuring stick of the movement of the sun based on the precession of the equinox. With the Old Testament, the story of Moses is the sun in the house of Aries, the ram, and then the Jesus story is the sun in the house of Pisces. What a lot of Masonic thinkers have argued is, and this is the Manly P. Hall take, on it is Jesus was real, but his story was corrupted at the Council of Nicaea, where the pagans basically crafted a solar religion around this guy. That's the Manly P. Hall kind of Albert Pike take on it. That's kind of like a cop out almost, but it's irrefutable to me that there are clearly these solar allegories, these astrotheological allegories going on with the Jesus story, with the Moses story. The whole idea. Of the death and resurrection. The whole thing. The Christian holiday. Christmas is the winter solstice, which is the birthday of the sun. The resurrection of the sun is when this 3-month stone of winter is rolled away, and with the vernal equinox. The whole celebration, the Jewish celebration. A lot of people are aware of this. The Jewish celebration of Passover and the Easter celebration of Christianity is actually demarcated by the moon and the sun. I believe that the Passover begins after the vernal equinox regarding the first full moon, and the Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon. It's something like that. I'd have to go up. So these are set by the sun and the moon. That's irrefutable. If you don't think there's a lunar solar importance to this, you're kidding yourself. That's irrefutable what I just said. I get into. What interests me with this was these Christian Jewish motifs that are revolving around the sun and the moon and astrology and astronomy, and how this is being continued on in Masonry, almost like as a preserver of these mystery school thoughts or traditions, if that makes sense to you. So I am fascinated by the astrotheological take on this, and it's something that very much interests me. And like I said, I think that when you are looking at this from a free-thinking standpoint, I do believe it is really hard to deny these solar astrological motifs in Judaism and Christianity. That's my take on it.
Rob, this takes us really to the door of these movies that I'm sure everybody's excited about you commenting on and showing us some symbolism. But at this point, I'm listening to your command of the symbols, and the questions are asking themselves. So I have to make a kind of a comment. What do you think? Well, I'll put it to you this way. Do you have any statistics on Freemasons who still attend church? Our world, a case could be made, is more divided than ever. And, it's not just the country, but people can pursue their own prerogatives. You've got the internet and unlimited information. You can go in 1,000 different directions. Are Freemasons still maintaining a presence in church? Are they interested in maintaining a presence in the Orthodox Church? Has that changed over the years? What's their relationship to Orthodoxy?
I'm going to give you a cop-out answer to that one, but it's the only way I know how to answer it. It's an individual Masonic question. I cannot speak for any other Freemasons. You would just have to ask them. I know of no statistics, or nor does Masonry keep, I don't believe, any sort of stat on Masons and their church-going activities. The only way I can really answer that question is, in order to join Freemasonry, you have to believe in a supreme being. Whatever that supreme being is left to you. It can be Jesus Christ, it can be Yahweh, it can be Allah. That is left to you. It is not the business of another Mason to dictate another man's religion. In Masonry, it is your path to God is your own. So if a Mason wants to go to church or doesn't want to go to church, that would be an individual prerogative that Mason would have to decide for himself. I know pretty well, I can state for a fact that Masonry would not keep any sort of statistics like that. And you would just, if you were interested, I mean, I could only speak for myself. I wouldn't never presume to say, well, these guys don't go or this guy doesn't go. You would just have to question the individual Mason on that. But I can kind of say that within Masonry, it's one of those things where, when you enter a Masonic lodge, there is this sort of like leave your politics and religion at the door almost. No one kind of, wants to really get into that. It is a little disingenuous. I mean, to be honest with you, where especially more from a political standpoint, I mean, Masonry, has had political tentacles before. Let's be honest about that. So, but like, as a Mason, I would never get into what another Mason's religious beliefs are, or do they attend church? I can answer the question for myself, which is no, I don't. But I mean, I do believe in a God, but I do not attend church regularly. But that's really the only way I can answer that question.
Look, Rob, it's only fair I ask one more question. Luther, I'm only asking.
Keep going. I'm okay. We can keep going because I know you guys wanted to get into the movie stuff. I mean, I have nothing scheduled for, after this. So, I mean, I'll keep going if you want to keep going. I can usually a little, I mean, we're into it for about an hour and a half now. Usually a little after 2 hours, my voice starts to go. So
well, I was gonna say I have something scheduled, and that's why I was gonna wrap things up here with this question, and then we have to continue this because
sure.
Look, you've done something different than any of our guests, and you've discussed things at a total different perception in a different way. Same web. I tell Luther, this is all attached to itself in so many ways. The teachings that these people, like, apart from Freemasonry, are coming to these conclusions in so many ways. It's like, and it just makes so much sense to me. I mean, to me, I'm beginning to start thinking I need to really investigate the Freemasons' traditions and attach, because like you said, is this a continuity of the real teachings of the biblical text? And I told Luther, I wonder if Jesus is this symbolic ritual rather than a real man. And I said that because of the 3 days and 3 nights and so many other things, chief cornerstone. There's so many aspects. Being a tecton in Greek, we know has to do with master mason or some type of a builder. Okay, there's just something going on. And does he represent the Masons themselves? Is he a symbol of each man in this tradition? So there's so much question marks, but I want to ask you about the Wizard of Oz. I set my chair back. Luther has his popcorn. I figure why not go out with a bang, and let's leave more of the movies for the next show and astrotheology and stuff for the next show, because our audience is going to love this show. This is going to be awesome. Get his book, please. Yeah. So political allegories and initiation into the mysteries in the Wizard of Oz. Rob.
Right. Well, The Wizard of Oz was a movie that I took on in the first movie book. It's in my first cinema book called Cinema Symbolism. And The Wizard of Oz is a very interesting movie because this is one of those movies that is multi-layered. There's a lot going on in this. And this should not surprise anybody because the guy who wrote the story was a man named L. Frank Baum. And L. Frank Baum was a disciple of Madame Blavatsky. He was a member of her Theosophy movement, which was, for lack of a better word, I'm condensing here, but just for the lack of it, it was essentially neo-Gnosticism. And you have this multi-layered story of the Wizard of Oz. And anytime you have a movie that is multi-layered, I like that. I mean, that's more of a challenge for me. The one I'm writing Cinema Symbolism 3 right now, and the one I just watched that is just, we won't get into it. The one that is, there's a couple of them that are really multi-layered. Donnie Darko, boy, oh boy. We could do a whole show on that one. Dark City is another one. And believe it or not, the Lego movie, the very first one, boy, oh boy, a lot of strange things going on in that one as well. Wizard of Oz. Three ways to look at this movie. One is you could just look at it on the surface, that it's about a girl who gets swept away to a magical land, goes on an adventure, kills an evil witch, returns home, end of story, have a nice day. That's what you would call your profane explanation. This would be your explanation, what Albert Pike would call the explanation for the vile multitude, or for the profane masses. This is just, your base story. But then we look deeper. And we'll get to the mystery school religion. That's the one least people know. We'll get to the one more people know first, which is the political allegory. That essentially the Wizard of Oz is a retelling of political, socio-economic culture in the United States from about 1895 to 1900. I believe Wizard of Oz was published in 1900, maybe 1901. I'd have to look. Where you have you had in 1896, I believe it was, you had a depression in 1896, where you had layoffs, foreclosures. The farm being swept away by the tornado is, of course, foreclosing on the farm. You have the president at the time was William McKinley. What he wanted to do was he wanted to back paperback money, and he wanted to use the gold standard to do it. So the Wizard of Oz is William McKinley, who lives in the Green Palace, paper money, Emerald City. And of course, the gold standard, the yellow brick road, leads to the creation of paper money, which is Emerald City. In the novel, the Dorothy's slippers are silver. This represented something called the Free Silver Movement, which is also akin to the gold standard. This is why silver walks alongside gold to lead to paper money. The Scarecrow, the American farmer, the Tin Man, the American laborer who was laid off, was put in a state of stasis because of the Depression of 1896. He eventually went back to work because of the oil companies, people like J.P. Morgan and Nelson Rockefeller. So to get the laborer moving, you have to oil him up. This is why Tin Man needs oil to move around. The Cowardly Lion is the political opponents or enemies of William McKinley. McKinley was a Republican, so his Democratic challenger was William Channing Bryant, who is the Cowardly Lion, all bark, no bite. Or you can also look at him as Eugene Debs, who was a socialist. We have reflections of this now. History seems to be repeating itself. So you can look at the Cowardly Lion as a combination of both Eugene Debs and William Channing Bryant. William Channing Bryant didn't drink alcohol, which is known as a teetotaler. Toto the dog is representing that. Dorothy is the average everyday person. And of course, the average everyday person, when McKinley ran upon, his running mate was Theodore Roosevelt, who represented the everyman. Dorothy, spelled backwards, is Theodore. So we have the reference to Theodore Roosevelt right there, Dorothy, Theodore. And of course, with inflation, with the idea of green money, you have inflation, the Wicked Witch, green skin, the negative side of paper money. I like in the novel, the witch is a Cyclops. She lives in the castle with one eye, overlooking the land of Oz. This is the raw material that became Sauron in Lord of the Rings, the eye of Sauron up in the tower, purveying Mordor. So that was where Tolkien is getting that from. Then you get into, that's essentially the political allegory. I may have missed one or two, but that's good enough. The mystery school Gnostic element of this comes from Baum's involvement with Blavatsky. And this is where you have the idea of initiation into gnosis, where you have the farm girl. This is akin to Alice in Wonderland, also by Lewis Carroll. You're going to see parallels with these two stories, where you have the girl going up the ladder of ascension, going up the ladder of Mithras, the staircase of the middle chamber of Solomon, the winding staircase to tornado, to be taken to the magical land to experience gnosis, to receive enlightenment. According to Madame Blavatsky, you need three things to receive enlightenment. You need intelligence, you need steadfastness, and you need courage. You need a brain, a heart, and courage, the Cowardly Lion, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow. Dorothy walks upon the golden path of religion, only to find that it leads to a false messiah. This is a common Gnostic theme, where the god of the Abrahamic faith is the demiurge, the lesser god, of creation. This is the creator God. This is the Wizard of Oz, the God who rules in fear, but is just a little silly man behind the curtain. So she walks on the golden path of religion only to find that it leads to a false messiah. And then you can look at the demiurge. In order to receive gnosis, the demiurge likes to keep mankind in a state of stasis, and to do that he uses a group of angels and demons called archons. And you can look at the trials of Dorothy, the defeating the witch, the getting the broom, as a test against the archons, which she eventually passes. And at the very end, she receives her wisdom. She receives her enlightenment. She receives her Gnostic epiphany, which is there's no place like home. Wisdom received. She clicks her heels 3 times, the magic number, and is transported back to the Kansas. And you will notice, and this is intentionally done, and this ties into what Luther was asking me earlier about researching this and, how do you interact in this world? Well, when you notice when she gets back, she's smarter. The farm hands don't understand her. She doesn't really understand them. They kind of laugh at her, but she knows she's smarter than them. She's received her Gnostic. She's received her she's passed her trials, been initiated, gone through the ritual of Wonderland or of Oz. And, you can look at the wizard. The Alice in Wonderland story is the exact same story, only she goes down underground. Dorothy goes to the magical land. So the whole idea of the Wizard of Oz is this initiation of Dorothy, this young girl, where she goes into this magical land to receive gnosis, to receive wisdom, to have this self-revelation, to receive wisdom, which for her is there's no place like home. I'll end on this point. Gnostic themes in Hollywood are very prevalent. It is a very common theme in Hollywood movies, especially some of their blockbusters. And I'll end on this. We can save this for next time. Gnostic cinema includes, where do you want to start? The Matrix, The Truman Show, Fight Club, Dark City, the Lego Movie, Vanilla Sky. This thread that I just described runs through all those movies. And it's a fascinating subject. And The Wizard of Oz is a great movie, a lot going on. I like that because it's multi-layered. And if you're interested in that, that was a movie I dissected in my very first book, Cinema Symbolism. So we can wrap up on that, and there it was.
Magnificent, Rob. You tickle my brain.
Well, thank you. I take that's what I want my books, when I write them, I want them to provoke discussion and to be controversial to a degree. And there's the Royal Arch book out, the 2 cinema books, the work of fiction, and as we went over, I'm working on some more right now. So I'm always trying to provoke and engage in stimulation, even if it's negative. I mean, I can take a negative comment. I'm an adult, and like I said, if you're interested in what we were talking about, by all means, check out the books. You can get the print or the Kindle. The Kindles are obviously, or the ebooks are a lot cheaper. But it was great, and I look forward to continue this conversation in a future date. You guys were well prepared. You understand the material clearly. And anytime you want to have me back on, you just let me know, and I'd love to come back on. I don't want to cannibalize your show, of course. But anytime you're ready, you just let me know.
Well, that's to have you back, but we don't want to let you go. We got to do that first before we have you back. But listen, let me do a follow-up on The Wizard of Oz. Because, again, this is so thought-provoking for me. 1939 was the movie, okay? We had the Roosevelt administration, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Work Progress Administration, the country coming out of the Great Depression. America is going back to work. Well, that's what was happening with domestic policy, but you had a myth to go along with that in The Wizard of Oz. And so
sure.
Is that the 1-2 punch in a country getting back on its feet? I mean, you got to have the myth on one hand, but then you have the reality. And I'm seeing how they both work together in building up a nation or rebuilding a nation.
Your point is very well taken. Though you are definitely onto something. This is something I've noticed as well. That there seems to be this synchronicity, whether it's conscious or unconscious, going on within the reality of popular culture, in the artistic expression, and the reality of the quote unquote real. No, Luther, you are definitely onto something. And here's what I can tell you. You're spot on with The Wizard of Oz, but you will find this there are other examples of this. Star Wars. I mean, you had the end of essentially the Vietnam War where people wanted fantasy. If Star Wars comes out in 1967, it's a flop. That movie was timed perfectly. That movie would not have worked 5 years later or 5 years earlier. 5 years later, you would have been into the 80s, New Wave, forget about it. 5 years earlier, Vietnam War, forget about it. The one thing I noticed, and you were spot on with The Wizard of Oz, is I first started picking up on this when I was writing Cinema Symbolism 2, but I started noticing this when I was writing Cinema Symbolism 3. So when we talk about these Gnostic movies, this awakening to consciousness, these journeys of self-revelation, where the character comes to know thyself, these journeys of, gnosis means to die, to know thyself, to discover something hidden. These Gnostic movies that Hollywood produced, and this must be psychological or subconscious, the ones we always wind up talking about, like I said, The Matrix, The Truman Show, Dark City, Vanilla Sky, Donnie Darko, they all came out in this 5-year window between about 1998 and 2002, where you had the changeover of the millennium, the end of the old, the start of the new, almost, I know this is going to be controversial, but you have the destruction of the old, the 9/11 motif, the death to the old, the wiping away, the moving forward into this new age. And at that exact time, you had all these Gnostic movies coming out. The Matrix is like 98, Fight Club is 98, Dark City, I think, was 97, or I might be, it was all this lead up to 2000, 2001. Vanilla Sky was 2001. What's the other one? Donnie Darko was 2001, which involved a plane crash. It was all these Gnostic films were being condensed right at the turn of the last millennium. I can't believe that's a coincidence. I cannot believe that. Has to be psychological, archetypal, subconscious, conscious, and it definitely is this idea of the art being mingled with what's going on in reality. I totally agree with that.
I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, all these things are becoming more and more evident the more I'm researching, but also it's just been experiential. Like, it's something I've experienced and know to be true. Now, this show has, it's almost like every show we do just gets better. It's just getting better and better. So this is why having a round 2, now that we've broke the ice and really know the potential of your thinking and where you're coming, you really, really know some stuff. How do they get these books? How does someone who enjoys what you're saying, how can they participate in helping you and your platform and what you do?
The easiest way to find me and get my books is just to go to my website. It's a very easy site to navigate. It's my name. My name is Robert W. Sullivan IV. So my website is Robert W. Sullivan IV, Roman numeral 4. When I created this website, Robert Sullivan, Rob's, these sites were all taken. So I just used Robert W. Sullivan IV. There are links there to buy my books. You can get the ebook. All my books are sold on all the major online retailers: Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble. You can get the print edition. They are all readily available. To make my books available for everybody, you can get the ebooks. They are much cheaper than the print edition. And again, if you're listening overseas in Canada or England, these are available on like Amazon, England or Amazon, Germany, or things like that. The website is also updated routinely with this interview will be posted there. Live appearances that I'm doing are posted there. There are links to all my social media. You can follow me on Twitter. I have a Facebook fan page. You can go and like that. Again, these sites are routinely updated. I have a YouTube channel, which is also on the site. A link to that, which was updated with content. These interviews, I have playlists with all my interviews there. Again, the site is Robert W. Sullivan IV, IV.com. RobertWSullivanIV.com. Links to buy the book. It's a very easy page to navigate. All the books are available on all the major online retailers. Get the print, the ebook, whatever you choose. And again, it's a very easy site to navigate. Links to buy the books all over the place. Updating appearances I'm going to be on. Information about me. If you just want to learn more about me or check out my social media, just check out the site, RobertWSullivanIV.com. And I'll just end on this. Again, if you just want to go to Amazon, you can just go to Amazon, just type the book's name in. Believe me, it'll come up, no problem.
Yeah, be sure. We'll have the description here filled with his information and how to reach him and his website. So you could just click the link and it'll be right there. Luther, do you want to take us out?
Yeah, it's what the show is all about, Derek. It's an inside glimpse into things that we thought we knew. Familiar and yet somehow unfamiliar. Thanks for the journey, Rob. We got to have you again soon. It's only the beginning.
Thank you for having me on. It's much appreciated. I look forward to returning.